There's no getting around it. English is a mess of a language. It's such a mess that spelling English words correctly is a competitive sport. It takes years of concerted effort, even for native speakers, to internalize and understand the complex ins and outs of English grammar. Pretty much everybody has at least one niche rule that they can never seem to remember all the details of, and one annoying person in their lives who insists on correcting them about it. The thing is, though, a lot of those generally accepted rules of English grammar really aren't. There are tons of these rules that get drilled into us at school that are framed like they're essential guidelines for communication, but lots of them range from insignificant to actively detrimental to communication. So take it from me, someone who has multiple degrees in this stuff. A ton of these so-called rules of English grammar are bad and stupid and wrong. I've picked out 10 of the worst offenders, and I'm going to tell you not only why they're bad, but also why the entire concept of grammar rules is on way shakier ground than you probably ever realized. Okay, let's talk some dumb grammar rules. Getting right into it with number 1. Don't say ain't. Maybe you grew up with the schoolyard saying of, don't say ain't, your mother will faint, or some variation thereof. Maybe that was just me. Ain't is a contraction of am not, and it functions similarly to aren't or isn't. Ain't is, for some, a grammatically incorrect word in and of itself, an improper word that should never be said. Saying ain't is, allegedly, bad and improper English, and a sign that the word's user is unintelligent or at least uneducated. But that wasn't always the case. The word ain't used to be much more widely accepted in ye olden days. The word appeared in tons of published literature from some of the most celebrated authors in the language, from Jonathan Swift to Lord Byron. It's only in the last century or so that ain't has become stigmatized. Over time, the word was used more and more by lower class people, and it took on the association of lower class word. Today, it's especially common in AAVE, or African American Vernacular English. It's not a coincidence that ain't got labeled as improper English right around the time when these particular groups of people started using it more. The movement to view ain't as an improper word evolved out of hatred and disdain for poor and marginalized people. And this demonization of the word ain't became justification to look down on others, and justify prejudice by labeling those who use it as less intelligent and less capable. There's nothing wrong with the word ain't, and accusing somebody of speaking improperly because they say it is ignorant at best and actively bigoted at worst. Ooh, got a little serious there for a second. Here's one that's a little more fun. Number 2, the whole Ibefore Eexcept after C thing. We've all heard it a million times. And while it's not really a grammar rule so much as it's a helpful tip for people to spell things correctly, it's still worth talking about. Because just how helpful is that tip really? I'll list some exceptions to that rule, just off the top of my head. There's height, weight, science, seas, beige, leisure, heist, neighbor, caffeine, efficient, 8, society, vein, seismic, seizure, either, neither, ancient, veil. That's a lot of exceptions. Huh. How weird.
Before E, except after C, and when sounding like A, is a neighboring way. And on weekends and holidays, and all throughout May, and you'll always be wrong no matter what you say.
That's not even all of them. Not even close. In fact, there are actually a lot more words that don't follow it than do follow it. That looks really absurd, but the I before E rule isn't entirely wrong. It really should say I before E except after C when making a long E sound. When you only look at IE words where the I and E come together to make an E sound, the percentage of words that follow the rule jumps up. If you're not sure whether the I or the E comes first in a word, sound it out. If the word makes an E sound, like say, believe, the I comes first. If it makes any other sound, there's a good chance the E comes first. But there are still lots of exceptions there too. Like seize from the list before, which makes a long E sound but still has the E first. Or tie, which makes an I sound and has the I first. Ultimately, I before E except after C is easy to remember but not very helpful. Number 3. Can I versus may I. This is a favorite correction of teachers everywhere. Can I go to the bathroom? I don't know, can you? This snide, cliche reply is meant to point out the difference between can and may. The phrase may I is used to ask for permission, whether you're allowed to do something, while can I should technically be used to ask if it's possible to do something. Since obviously it's physically possible to use the bathroom at any time, you should be using may I. But that's such a hyper-literal, uncharitable interpretation of the question. We use can and can't to indicate permission all the time, and restricting its use in this way is just plain obnoxious.
I can't wait to eat this bagel!
Yes, you can.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
The very idea of imposing such a rigid and inflexible definition of such a common word is untenable. And in a school setting, when kids have to ask permission before they do basically anything and disobedience is harshly punished, no wonder the line between possible and permissible is blurred. So you have my permission. You can use can as much as you want. Number 4, who versus whom. For those of you who don't know the difference, and I'm willing to bet that's most of you, here's how they're supposed to be used. Most sentences have a subject and an object. The subject is the noun that's doing something, and the object is the noun that's getting something done to it. So in the sentence, I went to the store, I is the subject, and the store is the object. If you're talking about the subject of the sentence, say who. If you're talking about the object, say whom. So for example, if Batman punched the Joker, you could ask, who punched the Joker? Or, whom did Batman punch? That's how it's supposed to work, in theory. But in reality, the word whom has almost completely fallen out of use. Outside of the most formal writing, basically everybody uses who for everything. Mainly because figuring out the difference is so unintuitive. So in almost all situations, just use who, it doesn't matter. Number 5, the singular they. The word they began as a plural pronoun to refer to a group of multiple people. However, more recently it's evolved to also refer to a single person who has either an unknown gender or doesn't identify as male or female. Lots of old people who aren't used to this will try to tell you that they has to refer to multiple people, and that calling a singular person they is not grammatically correct. But language naturally evolves over time, and new uses of words can spring up when needed. The concept of referring to a person in a gender-neutral way has become way more important in recent years. And since English didn't already have a gender-neutral pronoun for that purpose, the word they evolved to fill that need. It's a natural feature of language, and anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or hiding thinly veiled prejudice against those who would benefit from more inclusive language. Number 6. Split infinitives. Out of all the nitpicky rules in this video, I think this is easily the most pedantic. If you don't know, an infinitive is a verb that doesn't have any particular noun attached to it. In English, a verb is made into an infinitive by putting the word to in front of it. To run, to jump, to read, to write. If you took a Romance language in high school and had to learn about conjugating verbs, you probably remember some of this. It's considered improper grammar to put any word in between the verb and the to, usually an adverb. So according to this rule, you shouldn't say something like, to really try, because you'd be putting the word try in between to and the verb try. Instead, you should rearrange the words to keep to try together. That all sounds easy enough, but in practice, if you follow this rule to the letter, you'll end up creating a lot of awkward sounding sentences. I used a split infinitive earlier in this video, when I was talking about the singular they. However, more recently it's evolved to also refer to a single person who has either an unknown gender or doesn't identify as male or female. Which is easier to understand? It's evolved to also refer to a single person, or it's evolved to refer to a single person also. Splitting the infinitive makes the sentence a lot clearer, which is why I used it. If the whole point of grammar is to make language more clear, why would there be a grammar rule that seems to do the opposite? Where did this rule come from exactly? Well, English is unusual in the fact that its infinitive verbs are made up of 2 words. In many other similar languages, especially Latin and other Latin-based languages, infinitive verbs are 1 word. So in Latin, it's impossible to split an infinitive. And English, as a language descended from Latin, shouldn't split its infinitives either. Except English isn't Latin. It takes influence from many other languages. To say that just because it's a rule in Latin, it should also be a rule in English is absurd. None of that reasoning has any basis in how people actually talk. All this ties nicely into number 7. Never end a sentence with a preposition. Prepositions are, to simplify, location words. In, out, above, below, around, between, about, of, at, etc. And allegedly, it's improper to end a sentence with them. But which of these sentences is easier to understand? This is the item I told you about, or this is the item about which I told you. It's so much more awkward when you try not to end with about. And again, this rule comes from Latin, where because of the way Latin prepositions work, it would be impossible to end a sentence with one. Weirdly, both this rule and the split infinitives rule can be traced back to one guy, John Dryden. He was a grammarian from the 1600s, who decided that he wanted English to be more like Latin. So he wrote a bunch about how because Latin can't do these things, English shouldn't either. And people just went with it. People started repeating what he wrote and following these ideas until they got cemented as proper English grammar rules. But we're not beholden to one random dead guy's ideas about how language should be, especially when those ideas make sentences more confusing. Number 8. Doing good versus doing well, and all its variations, like bad versus badly and the like. Good is an adjective, meant to describe a noun. Well is an adverb, meant to describe a verb. Doing is a verb, so when describing the quality of your doing, you should say, I'm doing well. If you said, I'm doing good, that would mean that the things you're doing are morally good. Like, superheroes do good. But an unskilled superhero could be doing good, but not doing well. That's how it should work in theory. But much like the difference between who and whom, the average person doesn't understand the difference well enough and just uses good for everything, which has caused the phrase doing well to sound really stiff and formal. I know the difference between the two, but in a casual conversation, if somebody asks me, how are you doing? You know what I say? Good. Why? Because if I said, I'm doing well, thank you, I sound like a total goober. The social context of words and phrases are arguably way more important than what some rulebook says. So go ahead and use good and well interchangeably all you want. Number 9, literally versus figuratively. Oh, I can feel the heat and or general confusion coming off you right now. Because unlike all the other rules so far, which can be pretty obscure and hard to figure out, everyone knows the difference between literally and figuratively. We all know that the word figuratively is meant to indicate an idiom of some kind, that words are being played with, and literally, its opposite, indicates that these words mean exactly what they say. But we've also all heard people say things like, my head literally exploded, when obviously that's not literally what happened. What they should have said was, my head figuratively exploded, or more likely just, my head exploded. This feels like a new phenomenon. It seems like it's mostly younger people who say things like this. And because of that, it's easy to blame this whole thing on dumb hooligan teenagers who are degrading the sanctity of the English language. But this isn't new. People have been using literally like this for centuries. You can find examples in Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, and Jane Austen. When people pair an idiom or expression with the word literally, they're not doing it because they don't know what literally means. They're doing it on purpose. They're creating a hyperbole to exaggerate what they're saying and place greater emphasis on it. Saying, I'm swimming in money, is already an idiom and an exaggeration to create an image of a lot of money. Saying, I'm literally swimming in money, pushes it even further over the top to make it even more exaggerated and ridiculous. Ironically, doing this means you're using literally as a form of figurative language. But the point is, it has a purpose and people are doing it for good reason. If your argument against this kind of thing is that it's confusing, no, just no. You can figure out what the speaker means from context. If somebody says, I literally died, and you can't figure out whether or not they're still alive, that's on you. And number 10, slang. Just all slang. Just gonna make that as much of a blanket statement as I can. It's okay to use modern slang. Using it doesn't make you less intelligent, less eloquent, or especially less moral. Language evolves. Words are allowed to change in meaning, and new words are allowed to develop. I would suggest that before you use it, you consider whether the person you're talking to would know what it means, but you can say what words you want, how you want to say them. And bonus one, just because I think it's interesting. At some point in your life, an older person might have told you that you're supposed to put 2 spaces after the end of a sentence instead of just 1. But that's just a holdover from the eras of printing presses and typewriters. Machines like those were finicky, and it was safer to leave an extra space in between sentences in case they got smushed together. In the age of computers and word processors, there's no reason to keep doing this. Those are the 10 garbage rules that I decided to cover here. But there are loads of examples of ridiculous rules like this that I didn't get into. At this point, you might be wondering something like, okay, sure, a lot of these rules don't make a lot of sense, but they're still rules, right? Even if we don't like them, we still have to follow them if we want to speak proper English. But consider this question. Who made these rules? Not just these dumb ones, but all grammar rules. Where do they come from? The way we get taught grammar in school would have you believe that grammar was expertly crafted by a council of English speakers 1,000 years ago, and then gifted to us so that we could speak to each other cleanly and free of misunderstanding.
Please!
Your word is rejected.
But it belongs in the dictionary.
Silence!
Take him to the basement.
That's not how language works, though. And if you think about it for more than a few minutes, the idea makes no sense. Nobody sat down and invented the English language from scratch. It's not Klingon. No, English evolved organically through hundreds of years of people speaking to each other, with words, phrases, and grammar changing over time. Anybody who's ever even glanced at a piece of writing from the Middle Ages knows that the English of today is very different from how it used to be. The study of grammar has a lot in common with animal classification. Writers observed how people spoke and recorded it to better understand how we communicate. Over time, though, especially after the invention of the printing press led to a greater standardization of the language, grammar changed to be less of a helpful guide to understanding speech to absolute rules one must follow or else. This way of thinking totally ignores the inherent quality of evolution and change that language has. It's not that grammar doesn't matter at all. You can't just say whatever words you want and expect people to understand you.
Why waste time? Say lot word when few word do trick.
And what are you gonna do with all this time?
See world.
That's the problem with your method, because I still don't know if you're saying see world or see the world, and it's taken a lot of time to explain it.
The purpose of grammar rules are to help you speak clearly and be understood. But if a grammar rule would make your speech less clear if you followed it, you shouldn't follow it. You can learn grammar from a book, sure, but an arguably better way to learn is to listen to how people around you talk and copy what they do. That's how people did it for thousands of years before grammar books were invented, and this also allows for the natural evolution of language. In other words, grammar doesn't come from textbooks. Grammar comes from the way people really speak in real life. If a grammar rule doesn't reflect the way real people speak, it's not a real or valid rule. Anyone who insists on enforcing small petty rules like this is doing so out of a mix of fear of change and general snobbery. By the way, this is not me trying to be a rebel and argue against the institution of grammar. Everything I'm saying here is what the vast majority of linguists believe in. There are people out there who constantly yell about how the English language is degrading, and people are destroying our ability to communicate by refusing to learn grammar rules. But that completely ignores the fact that language is constantly changing. Always has, and always will be.
It really puts you in the Christmas spirit. Whatmas?
Oh, you mean Xmas. You must be using an archaic pronunciation, like when you say ask instead of ax. Hey, let me ax you something.